Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, Context is Everything Media Network founder and CEO, John Michael, is reading a book, Dissolving the Ego and Realizing the Self. This is a compilation of tidbits of wisdom. And here today, we enter section 2 of this book. And in this section, we will discuss many tidbits of wisdom about the nature of the mind. Often used interchangeably with ego, mind is the processing unit with which the ego is identified. The processing unit with which the ego is identified. Ultimately, like the ego, the mind itself is only a concept. As Dr. Hawkins, the author, explains, experientially, one can only state that thoughts, feelings, images, and memories come into one's awareness in an endless progression. And it is an endless progression that we've come to call mind. As one comes to understand the true nature of the mind, one becomes less at the effect of its inner workings and better positioned to transcend to one's identification with it. So, I guess that means as you get to know the processes of the mind, you get to understand the nature of the mind, thus not fall prey to its common pitfalls and traps. Like the body, the mind is not one's real self. Like the body, it is basically impersonal. As it has thoughts, but these thoughts are not a product of the self. Even if a person does not want a mind, he or she has one anyway. There is no choice in the matter. The mind is imposed and thrust upon one unasked. And the fact that having a mind is an involuntary imposition helps with the realization that it has a personal choice or decision. That it is not a personal choice or decision to have a mind. That is what that means. Okay. All seeming separation is an artifact of thought. It is essential to see that the mind is at all times experiencing a point of view. The design of the human mind is comparable to that of a computer, in which the brain is hardware capable of playing any software programs fed into it. The hardware is, by design, incapable of protecting itself from false information. Therefore, the mind will believe any software program with which society has programmed it, for it is innocently without any safeguard or protection. The human mind, by virtue, is in its innate structure, is naive, blind to its limitations, and innocently gullible. Everyone is the victim of the ignorance and limitations of the human ego. Now that's interesting, because really, when you think about it, you can meet people, and I am one of these people, that has a lot of lofty ideas, but these ideas come from where? It's like I'm kind of just parroting what I've heard. So if you're parroting what you've heard and ideas don't truly come from your experience in life, how do you know it too deeply? But most of the discussion and argument that you hear in society come from just secondhand stories that you hear from others. You're being programmed at that level and not really speaking on what's important, which is deeper understanding of yourself so that you can do better and do more in this world to help people find their true self. I mean, that's what causes distress, right? Isn't the problem in our society that people are not their true selves? I think that would resolve a lot if we were to do work rather than to focus on external problems that we're told about, to focus on the internal roadmap of our consciousness. The human mind is incapable of discerning truth from falsehood. Were this not so, there would have been no wars in history, no social problems, and no ignorance or poverty. Meaning that society programs individuals to just go along with things. So wars would not occur because society would not be able to program individuals, because the mind would be able to supersede the illogical genocide or illogical holocaust or illogical anything that is brutal and tyrannical. The mind would be like, individuals would be like, no, that's not a good idea. I don't want to be a part of that. But the human mind is manipulatable and by its nature naive, as this book says. And I think that kind of makes sense now that I'm thinking about it. Everyone would be enlightened if the mind worked the way that we thought. And the consciousness level of mankind would be at a higher level. Because of the dualistic perception, the mind could no longer discern the abstract symbol from reality. The road to error was open and inviting, and opinion held sway, as the mind had no intimate mechanism, as the mind had no innate mechanism to discern truth from falsehood. As a result of dualistic mental processing, the mind had developed the capacity for repression and denial so that it could remove obstacles to achieving its goal. The mind discovered that it could deny ownership of any unwanted side of a pair of opposites and project it onto the world. Thus we are born not only politics, but also the well-known psychological mechanism of splitting, repression, denial, and projection. This capacity turned out to be a fatal mechanism in that even when faced with dire results, the ego relentlessly pursued the same mistakes. Millions of people die in every generation throughout history and continue to do so in today's world due to this defect of the mind. Except in small personal affairs, the mind is not constructed to readily learn from its mistakes. One is not forced to feel resentment by a negative memory, nor does one have to buy into a fearful thought about the future. These are only options. The mind is like a television set running its various channels for selection, and one does not have to follow any particular temptation of thought. One can fall into a temptation of feeling sorry for oneself, or feeling angry or worried. The secret attraction of all these options is that they offer an inner payoff or a secret satisfaction that is the source of the attraction of the mind's thoughts. I don't know if I understand, but sounds like it might make sense. One thing is obvious. The mind is totally unreliable. It cannot really be depended upon at all. It is not able to be consistent, and its performance is sporadic as well as erratic. It will forget to take the keys to the office, forget telephone numbers and addresses, and be the source of frustration or annoyance. The mind is contaminated by emotions, feelings, prejudices, blind spots, denials, progressions, paranoias, phobias, fears, regrets, guilts, worries, and anxieties, along with the fearsome specters of poverty, old age, sickness, death, failure, rejection, loss, and disaster. In addition to all the foregoing, the mind has been innocently and erroneously programmed by endless propaganda. Political slogans, religious and social dogmas, and continual distortions of facts, not to mention falsifications, errors, misjudgments, and misinformation. Above all else, the primary defect of the mind is not only its content, which is often irrelevant or in error, but the fact that it has no means of telling truth from falsehood. It is merely a game board, the mind is. And that brings me back to something I remember from my teaching days. I remember hearing it in a book. I forget what book it was, but in my drives to school, I would listen to audiobooks. It could have been something about like Zen Buddhism or something. I don't know. But the thing that I told in class that resonated to me, potentially more so than it resonated to the students themselves, was that in the mind is this game board, as they describe here. And picture the mind as a game board. You are getting different game boards through human experience, positive or negative experience that you have. You're building different game boards that you can place a little figurine of yourself into and let situations play out. As you build more experience in your life, you can put your little figurine of yourself in different situations and have a more accurate understanding of what can happen, what can unfold. This is the process of the mind that is useful to me in my understanding. That this book is talking about. That the mind can kind of help make decisions, and that you can predict things based off of experience. The mind is cataloging your experience, and I think that this is a productive use of the mind, to have experiences in your life and to be able to kind of make decisions based off of your experiences. Humility is of greater value than all factual accumulations, unless one has completely and totally experienced the presence of God in its stunning absolute allness. It is safe to assume that one really knows nothing, and that all accumulated so-called knowledge is really only tentative. Anything within that claim, I know, proves that it is false by the very statement, or else it would not make such a claim. Thinking proceeds from lack. Its purpose is gain. In wholeness nothing is lacked. All is complete, total, and whole. There is nothing to think about, nor any motive to think. No questions arise, and no answers are sought or needed. Totality is complete, totally fulfilling, with no incompleteness or process. Beliefs are determinant of what one experiences. There are no external causes. One discovers the secret payoffs that are obtained from unconscious secret projections. One's underlying programs can be discovered by simply writing down one's litany of grievances and woes, and then merely turning them into their opposites. So are you saying that you can get to know yourself and your driving motivations by looking at the opposite of your pet peeves? If your pet peeve is disorder, and like you walk into a kitchen and you see the cabinet doors open, if that's a pet peeve of yours, then would that mean that one of your guiding motivations is to have order, which is obviously something that can be pathological and can get out of hand, right? Obsessive compulsive disorder is like an over necessity of order in some situations. So is that what this is saying? Because I think that it might be. Thoughts are occurring on their own, not because they are caused by anything or anyone. Operationally, the mind is dualistic and thus sets up separate mental processing based on arbitrary hypothetical positionalities that have no intrinsic reality. Thus, by design, the mind has the basic defect, as pointed out by Descartes, that it cannot differentiate recognizance from extensa. RESCOGITANS from RESEXTENSA. That is, mental activity about the seeming appearance of the world re cogitans, versus the world as it actually is, re extensa. The mind thus confuses its own projections and mistakenly assumes that they have an external, independent existence, whereas in reality, no such condition exists. The mind translates phenomena in 1/10,000th of a second. Thus, the mind is like a playback monitor of a tape recorder. And when the interference between the mind and phenomena and experiences dissolves, the differences are quite dramatic. And the last bit of wisdom for today. The mind acts as a processor of data simultaneously from both within and without. It categorizes, sorts, prioritizes, contextualizes, and interprets simultaneously as it concordantly draws on memory banks, emotional centers, and conditioned responses and their correlations. All the above are orchestrated contextually with emotional animal instincts that are sorted, rejected, accepted, or modified. In addition, this profound complexity is simultaneously subject to options, choices, and will. Options and choices are related to meaning and value overall, and they are under the influence of dominance and of an all-inclusive overall field of consciousness, having concordant and variable levels of power related to levels of consciousness that is also influenced by karmic propensities. Simultaneously, the mind assesses degrees of relative truth, credibility of information, and suitability and probabilities of action within similarly multi-layered behavioral social limits, including moral, ethical, social, and religious principles. That's kind of like what I said about the game board that you have in your mind about using your little figurine and putting your figure of yourself in different situations. Or at least that's what it sounded like. That's it for today. I hope you have a lovely day. And if you're watching this today when I release it, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Solstice, Happy the other one. And I'll see you after Christmas. Goodbye. Oh yeah, if you enjoy the content, please follow.